Okay, take a seat if you can, please. We should go ahead with the next session. As you can see, we are following the different tracks of the new guideline that we are methodologically updating. I'm very happy to chair this session with two big friends and important doctors like Edwards and Sanjay Agrawal. So I just, as a president, ask you to be in time with your presentation because we have to leave this room at 2 p.m. So please go ahead. Thank you. The microphone, please. We have some problem with the microphone. Abbiamo un problema con I microfoni per I moderatori.
So,
It's
yes,
going?
thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome on behalf of IFSO, and it's good to be back in Naples again after a couple of years already. We're going to start off this session with Giovanni Merola. Welcome, and thank you so much for having this great lecture on the older population. And you're talking about a part that goes to my heart, the systematic review of the new guidelines. So please try to stick in time, and we are going to do discussions after every talk. Yes? So the floor is yours.
Microphone.
Good morning, everyone. Before starting my presentation about older population, I will let me thank Professor De Luca and Professor Anghisani for this great opportunity. I have nothing to disclose. This is my case mix. What is state of art before 2022 about the topic of my relation? These two studies resume very well what is the state of art. Age is an important independent factor for bariatric surgery mortality and have an increased overall complication rate with the increase of the age. Moreover, there is an expected increased number of candidates for bariatric surgery in elderly population, and many publications is looked for the safety and of bariatric surgery in elderly, but data still scarce, and especially all studies were very heterogeneous. This is what states IFSO about the indication and the selection criteria for bariatric surgery, especially for age until 2022, age between 18 and 65 years old. But what happened during IFSO World Congress 2022? ASMBS and IFSO presents a joint major update on guideline, and especially in the topics of extreme of age and older population, they stated there is not upper patient's age limit for MBS. The only one criteria of selection for upper limit age could be the frailty of patients. Also, as just Goldman said in a previous paper. In order to give more strong to this statement, the IFSO Research Committee, in agreement with the IFSO Committee, two teams for a methodological support were created. A team one for systematic review of literature, and the methodological approach was a PRISMA statement with the update of 2020, and the tool PICO methodology for search string creation. Exclusion criteria were paper not in English language, not available full text, letter to editor, follow-up less than 12 months, number of patients less than 15, and descriptive article or article before the year 2000. In particular, for older population, we created two PICO because we could compare younger versus older people and always in bariatric surgery, or all population of older people, but bariatric surgery versus lifestyle change. Merging these two people, we could find a string that report more than 10,000 results. And after all record screening, we included in qualitative analysis only 80 papers. About these 80 papers, only one RST, that was the base trial, trial of older people versus older people, RIGB versus sleeve gastrectomy, 8 comparative papers, 1 prospective, 7 retrospective, and 9 non-retrospective, non-comparative papers. All papers present a JADA score for ST more than 3 and a minor score more than 7 or 9, respectively, for non-RST, non-comparative, and comparative studies, with a level of global level of evidence between 2B and 3A. In particular, I report this table that is not a meta-analysis because the results come from non-homogeneous data evaluation, but I present this table only for let you know that the quality of bariatric surgery for patients aged more than 65 could ensure and improve the comorbidity resolution for these patients with a good mean AVL percentage, despite there is a great number of perioperative complication rates. According to our literature review, we could agree that IFSO, with the IFSO ASMBS guideline 2022 with a recommendation grade B. There is no upper patient age limit, and the patient must be carefully selected individual for considered high risk for general surgery, may benefit from MBS, and comorbidities and frailty must be very well evaluated. We could not state which could be the best procedures in elderly. More detailed and methodological appropriate studies must be provided. Thanks for your attention.
So Giovanni, thank you so much for your nice overview. You kept in time very nicely. So we have a couple of minutes left for a couple of questions. Are there any questions from the room? Because otherwise I have one for you. And again, if you have any questions, come up to the microphone and do ask away. Nice overview, but considering after your selection you have a non-frail patient, etc., is surgery, bariatric surgery, obligatory being done in specialized centers, or do you think that any bariatric center is capable of doing these kind of surgeries in these patients? In general, I know there's a lot of difference in between patients, but the general, let's say 70-year-old, can he or she be operated in any bariatric clinic?
In general, for older population, I think that they need special centers for bariatric surgery that could not be done in every surgery because the frailty of that patients could be very high and need very strict follow-up and a very strict specialist in the center for MBS.
So another question from my colleague.
Giovanni, I also have a question for you because I know you are a good clinical methodologist and a good statistician. What do you think about this item of the methodological approach you had?
I think that in order to have a good approach for this item, PICO and the Prisma statement could be the best tool for a systematic review, but we need to know that in order to have a very detailed data, we need to do also network meta-analysis or other RCT. In order to have better data, data must be more homogeneous.
With this literature, is according to you possible to consider a grade regarding this topic?
Regarding this topic, a grade could be possible.
Could be, okay.
So last question is for you, Katalin. So go ahead,
Yeah,
take the floor.
congratulations for this study. I would continue the question that Edo asked about the centers. I will extend to the follow-up because they are fragile, then they need special follow-up. Do you consider that this is mandatory for those patients to have a more specific follow-up? One, and then you said that you cannot recommend one or the other of the procedures, bariatric procedures, we can offer to them. Do we have any clue in respect with the nutritional consequences that are putting this patient in danger? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. In order to answer to follow-up question, I think that they need a more strictly follow-up, but every study report a standard follow-up also in older patients. In order to answer to the question about the better procedure, only base trial could answer to our question. The reports that laparoscopic renipsol gastric bypass had better results in terms of comorbidity resolution, but also had more postoperative complication rate than laparoscopic sleeve gastrectomy. We need to balance the risk of a complication with the better outcome of comorbidity resolution.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Abdul Rahman Nimeri, who is a very close friend of mine and know him for a number of years. He's going to talk about older population, what the guidelines don't say, real life indications outside guidelines. All for you.
So thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Ido and Maurizio, for the opportunity. I was asked to speak about a real case, and I'm going to tell you about a patient I had in clinic and try to kind of address what was just discussed about the literature. This is my financial disclosure slide. I'm a speaker from Medtronic, but has no bearing on this presentation. And this is my disclosure slide. The majority of what I do is Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, more than 60%. A third is sleeve gastrectomy, and 10% is duodenal switch. So the three questions I'm going to try to address with this real case is looking at the safety and efficacy of bariatric surgery short-term in the elderly, trying to look at the cardiovascular benefit to these patients, and ultimately, which procedure would you choose when someone comes to the office, which was the question that was just asked. So this is a real patient, a 68-year-old retired architect that I had in the clinic, BMI 51. She was diabetic. When she came to us, she was on a low-dose insulin, hypertension, sleep apnea, and reflux. Her reflux was moderate when she came, high cholesterol, and she's had 2 hip replacements and gallbladder surgery. So I'll first just go over the literature briefly, and then I'll tell you the discussion I had with this patient. So when you look at the short-term outcomes, the outcomes of elderly patients over 65 are good. So the safety is there, but the outcomes are 2 to 3-fold worse than younger patients. And both our group and another group have shown that there are inflection points in regards to short-term complications. One that we showed at the age of 45, another group that showed that there's another inflection point at the age of 59. So we showed that if you compare patients below 45 years of age compared to patients above 45 years of age, with every 10-year increase in age, there's more morbidity and mortality in surgery. I mean, it's safe overall for everybody. But as you get older, from 45, and then the second group, the authors showed that 59 is another inflection point. The literature doesn't show a lot of large randomized controlled trials. There's at least one trial from Brazil, very small trial, 16 patients, 18 patients in each group, sleeve versus bypass. All of them were elderly over 65, BMI between 35 and 52, and they showed that the complications were similar, but there was a trend towards lower complication rate in sleeve gastrectomy. And even though, I mean, this could be because the trial was small. I mean, maybe in real life, larger trials, that difference could have been statistically significant. This is the base randomized control trial. Now, if you look at the long-term benefit, there's a systematic review looking at 16 studies, more than 11,000 patients, and the weight loss and the cardiovascular improvement is better after Roux-en-Y gastric bypass at 3 years, but and especially when it comes to specific outcomes. So they have overall, these patients, lower risk of having an MI after metabolic and bariatric surgery compared to patients who are having orthopedic or GI surgery. Overall, at 1 year, the diabetes resolution is significant. And if you compare sleeve and bypass, there's a study where they looked at more than 94,000 elderly patients. 2/3 had a sleeve, 1/3 had bypass, and they matched them. So at 4 years, metabolic and bariatric surgery lowers not only mortality, but improves other onset of MI, heart failure. And the benefit is evident in the elderly patients, but in aggregate, when you do the surgery, it does confer an advantage when it comes to cardiovascular benefit. And another group looked at a retrospective administrative Medicare database looking at patients who had sleeve and bypass between 2012 and 2017, 30,000 patient, 3-year follow-up. The sleeve gastrectomy patients have lower 3-year complication rate, lower re-intervention, lower ED utilization, lower rehospitalization, and similar cost that was not statistically significant. Howard, it all showed that also at 5 years, if you look at anti-reflux medication use, if you compare sleeve and bypass patients use PPIs less for whatever reason, whether it's marginal ulcer, reflux, or symptoms or other things. So the drop in PPI use was more significant in gastric bypass than sleeve. And then finally, the same group showed that if you look at hypertension, diabetes, and high cholesterol, the use of medications is lower in patients who had gastric bypass. So patients with gastric bypass were more likely to discontinue their antihypertensive medications after 5 years. And in aggregate, the studies demonstrate that there's an advantage to Roux-en-Y gastric bypass over sleeve gastrectomy in elderly patients in respect to medication use. And this is something that's important to patients. I mean, patients, that's a real outcome. They less pills that they use every day. So it seems like elderly patients over 65 undergoing metabolic and bariatric surgery, they lose weight. They experience improvement in type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, reflux medications, and it is as safe as hip replacement. So yet the elderly patients tend to not to be referred to have surgery. And at least in the US, if an 80-year-old has a hip replacement, nobody raises an eyebrow. But if a 70-year-old considers sleeve gastrectomy, and they have hypertension, they have diabetes, people look at it like, whoa, what's going on? Why should they have a sleeve gastrectomy? So back to our patient. So I met the patient initially and showed her this ASMBS-equipped risk assessment tool that we use for our patients. And I showed her exactly how, what will be the change in her BMI. So this is a tool that's available to all of you. It's on the web. You plug in ASMBS-equipped risk calculator, and then comes up, you plug in the patient's age, gender, BMI. So I put the calculator, showed her that her BMI will go down to 40 with sleeve, 38 with bypass, and 35 with DS at 1 year. That she'd lose 72 pounds with sleeve, 87 with bypass, and 104 with DS. I showed her the resolution of the different medical problems she has, and you can see them listed, I don't have to say them. And then I showed her the risk of complications. So when I met with her initially, she chose the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. And then she went through the process, she met our team, she lost a little bit of weight. And then I met her again in the preoperative visit. We are planned for a gastric bypass. And I typically use the calculator at that time and only show them the procedures that are close to each other. So if they chose a sleeve, I show them sleeve and bypass. If they chose a DS, I show them DS and bypass, because I want them to know what's the other option. So I'm going through the process and I'm waiting for the consent. So I'm going through the briefing. And then her husband, who was sitting next to her, an older gentleman, very quiet, not saying anything. When I finished, he said, "Can I ask a question?" I said, "Sure." He goes, "Don't you think the sleeve gastrectomy is better for my wife than the bypass?" And I said, "Why do you say that?" So I reiterated how the bypass is better for her reflux, for her diabetes. Then he said, well, honey, your reflux since you lost weight has improved, and you're using one less medication. This is a real story. And your diabetes has improved. And he told her that, look at the risk. One of them is single digits, one of them is double digits. And we had a discussion back and forth, and she chose to have the sleeve gastrectomy. And she's done extremely well with the sleeve gastrectomy. But I think the moral of the story is our patients are very smart. We think when they come to our office that we have to decide for them. But these are the same patients that go buy houses on their own, they go decide on buying a car on their own, and they are very good at deciding what to do. What we need to do is give them very good, solid information early on paper. So I print this and I give it to patients. And then when they come back with their significant other, go over it again. And this case happened several years ago, but it taught me the importance of letting the patient be in the driver's seat and let them actually decide what they need to do. So I think the take-home message is that metabolic bariatric surgery is safe in the elderly. It is safe short-term, both sleeve and bypass, but it's not as safe as younger patients. And there are two inflection points at 45 and 59. It confers a long-term survival and a reduced cardiovascular event even in the elderly patients. Sleeve gastrectomy clearly has lower risk. And when we talk to patients, similar to the last session when we talked about high-risk patients, whether it's kidney disease or liver cirrhosis, we need to make sure high-risk patients know that the risk of sleeve gastrectomy and Roux-en-Y gastric bypass is not the same, even though most of what I do is Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. But for high-risk patients, most of them get a sleeve gastrectomy, even if they have reflux, even if they're diabetic. If you look at diabetes control, hypertension control, high cholesterol control, and reflux medications, the gastric bypass is superior to sleeve gastrectomy. So the efficacy is more. And we have to remember, when someone comes to the office, some patients are risk averse primarily. Some patients are benefit seeking primarily. All humans are risk averse. But you have to figure out your patient, which one of them is that. So for this patient, sleeve gastrectomy was better. Maybe for the next patient, the patient would choose gastric bypass. But I think ultimately, we need to educate the patients and then let them decide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What I can say is that I have similar views as well. I think patients do make very clever choices, and at that age group, when you give them the risk profile of both the operations, they do tend to end up choosing sleeve more often than bypass. That's definitely true in my practice as well. Any questions from the floor?
Ramon, so gentleman.
He's a real gentleman, Ramon.
Thank you. My name is Ana Carolina. I'm from Brazil. I'm one of the authors from the BASE trial, the randomized trial you mentioned. We're moving now to 5 years follow-up. We have better clinical results for bypass, as you said, also regarding weight loss and comorbidities. The question for sleeve, a question we have in clinical practice is, we did the primary surgery with 67, 68 years old. By 75, they have severe GERD. Do we do a revisional from sleeve to bypass? We're having these kind of problems now.
Sure.
So that's a trick question. Even older patients with possible revisional surgery. Thank you.
Sure. I think, number one, congratulations on your randomized trial. I think at the end of the day, for any disease we treat, there's a risk-benefit ratio. And clearly, at the age of 70-something, the risk-benefit ratio is not in favor of revisional surgery. And sometimes we have to make that assessment in surgery. So sometimes if you go into surgery and you're planning a procedure and there's adhesions, you have to go back and decide, should I convert? Is the risk-benefit ratio is in favor of conversion? Or the risk-benefit ratio in favor of backing out? So this risk-benefit ratio always has to be assessed. In your situation, in that patient, I would not do revision.
So,
Ramon.
Thank you. Thank you for the excellent presentation. I think you have given a very important vision of the problem in the elderly and not focusing on the weight loss. Because unfortunately, our endocrinologists and our medical doctors, what they only focus is on the weight loss main of the times. And I think we need to strengthen the ideal surgery in terms of reduction of the cardiovascular risk and improvement of other comorbidities. However, I think we have to be honest with the audience. Can you tell us the impact of this surgery in the weight loss? Although I think it's not our target as a surgeons. We need to defend this surgery. I propose this surgery in my private practice. Even we don't have any limit of age restriction in the private practice. So could you tell us some data regarding the weight loss in the mid-long term for these patients?
So there's not a lot of data looking at the elderly, looking at long-term weight loss outcomes. So that's why I cannot tell you. But clearly, in 2023, we now have very effective medications. And if this patient who's diabetic in the US, she could get a GLP-1. So whether she should have a sleeve and GLP-1, and even if she regains weight, maybe she just needs GLP-1. I think at the end of the day, we have to balance many things. And this is what we have to do as surgeons. We cannot have one tool in our toolbox. We have to use personalized medicine to decide and arrive at something specific for each patient.
And I think another point very important is all the hip replacement and all the effect. I mean, the American Society for Trauma and Orthopedics already encourages these patients to undergo bariatric surgery. And this is a statement of their society before having any hip replacement, although we still need to work a lot in our countries for these issues. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to the next speaker, and of course it's my great pleasure to introduce Maurizio De Luca. You're going to lecture us on what to do in our sarcopenic patients, our bariatric patients. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Edo, for your introduction. Let me go ahead with the first slide. Okay. What is sarcopenia? This is a term coined by Rosenberg in 1997 and is derived from the Greek word sarx, flesh, and penia, loss, which refers to the age-related loss of skeletal muscle mass. The term describes important change in body composition and related function, and classifies patients and examine underlying pathogenetic mechanisms which generate this syndrome. What about this study of Moa Partner 2019? They consider nutritional deficiencies and physical inactivity as main causes of sarcopenia. And as we know, excessive energy intake and physical inactivity, obesity. But the two syndromes can be fused together, producing frailty, disability, cardiovascular disease risk, and death. What about this European classification by the ASO and ASPEN societies? Sarcopenic obesity is a clinical and functional condition which associates obesity and sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is defined as low fatty free mass and function, has been identified and described as a geriatric syndrome with a multifactorial etiology. So, in their classification of causes, as you can see, two main roles is given by the age, of course, and at the end, it's important to consider long-standing restricting diets and bariatric surgery. What about diagnosis? Altered skeletal muscle functional parameters, altered body composition. Two staging, stage 1, no complication, stage 2, presence of at least one complication related to it. Metabolic disease, functional disabilities, cardiovascular and respiratory disease. What about diagnosis? Very easy to evaluate the muscle mass with CT scan or magnetic resonance, but a little bit expensive. Less expensive evaluating muscle mass is DXA and BIA. But in the evaluation of sarcopenia, we should consider the muscle strength by the hand grip strength and the physical performance by evaluating the gait speed. So, First of all, we should consider the prevalence. You can see in this study, 2020, that sarcopenic obesity is fairly common in Caucasian patients with obesity, male, females, age more than 60, that are candidates to MBS. The message I'm trying to give is that some micronutrients and macronutrients very frequently are present before the operation. Also in this case, you can see that after the operation, the functional evaluation method with hand grip, time up and go test, and gait speed test don't reflect the anatomy. And improvement in muscle strength was followed by improvement in metabolic parameters. So don't consider only the anatomy, but please consider only the functional of the muscle. I've tried to fuse these two presentations, where in the first part there is the paper, the table of the paper I showed before, and trying to translate it in what we can see after bariatric surgery in our patient. We know that different level of exclusion of small bowel with different operation. Sleeve gastrectomy, Roux-en-Y, OAGB, BPDDS, and consequently, we need to take care of different kinds of micronutrients and macronutrients. But I want to insist on saying that in many cases, the preoperative management is important because in many cases, we can see that some micronutrients are in deficiency in our patients. This is a study 2015 that showed this. Another study 2016 that showed deficit of vitamin D and iron in the good percentage, 25 to 30% of their patients. Again, another study who shows that in 80% of analyzed patients, we can have preoperatively micronutrient disorder. So the consequence could be this. You can see that in this meta-analysis is showed that the frailty consequent to the bariatric surgery determines risk of fracture, especially in upper limbs, in operated patients. So what we can do? The European Society of Obesity give us some suggestions related to the identification, clinical identification of micro deficiency for every kind of operation. And at the same time, we should analyze another important chapter, the deficiency of protein, of the macronutrients. So two important chapters, the micronutrient deficiency that quite often we can have also preoperatively, and the micro and the micronutrient deficiency that we can have postoperatively, as shown in this paper. Also, in the paper of Chen, 2019, is showing that patients can develop protein deficiency after gastric bypass, especially with the biliopancreatic limb of 400. And in comparison with some kind of operation, you can see that the situation, and we told it before, is better for sleeve gastrectomy compared with Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. This is another paper who shows that the sleeve gastrectomy regarding micronutrients and macronutrients is less dangerous than gastric bypass. And regarding OAGB, we can see that with different seeds of exclusion of the small bowel, we have different macro deficiency and micro deficiency. This is an interesting table who shows what we have evaluated in time related for every kind of operation and what we can do. of course, give a supplementation of protein in this patient. As you can see, if we give a supplementation of protein, we have a reduction of lean tissue mass loss. At the same time, to increase the training for this patient. So, protein supplementation and increasing of exercise reduce risk of macronutrient deficiency and sarcopenia. As you can see, in this case, we have results in favor of these two kinds of treatment as showed in this table published in 2017. In conclusion, sarcopenia is defined as low fatty free mass and function, is a geriatric syndrome with a multifactorial etiology, included nutritional deficiency and physical inactivity, whose prevalence increases with age. Is a clinical and functional condition correlated to obesity and low fatty free mass. Patient candidate to metabolic bariatric surgery can report malnutrition in macronutrient preoperatively. MBS could be related to macronutrients and micronutrient deficiency, and the treatment could be protein intake, micronutrient supplementation, and exercise training, which have altogether an important role. Thank you.
So Mauricio, thank you so much for this excellent talk again. We're talking about management, but I would rather talk about prevention. So you have a whole list of what you should measure, et cetera, that's, nobody does that, to be quite honest. So in practice, that's something we dream of, but we're not doing in practice. Can you tell us, in your clinic, what you do to prevent sarcopenia effectively? What do you do?
First of all, I try to identify clinically sarcopenia, which is not easy. Then we do different consideration related to the different operation. We ask different blood tests with different timing according to the operation. And this is the manner to prevent as possible sarcopenia. In case of sarcopenia, we treat it with, as I told you, different kind of protein supplementation and vitamin supplementation, if it's the case, and exercise training. In any case, it's not easy, and it's not completed in our hospital. We need a territorial effort when a sarcopenia is conclamated.
So just a sort of mental question, let's say. Is sarcopenia the surgeon that has to prevent and treat it? Or is it the endocrinologist, let's say the internal meds guys and girls, in your opinion?
I think that the surgeon has to know perfectly what is sarcopenia, what are its signs and its symptoms. Then, of course, we have to cooperate multidisciplinary, and the endocrinologists have an important role.
Catalin.
Thank you very much for your question. I am a discussant here, so I am trying to make the things more active. Mauricio, we have such a case. Do you contraindicate bariatric surgery or postpone how you prepare your patient for the bariatric surgery? And if yes, which procedure you are going for in the light of pharmacology and everything that has been discussed?
No, I strongly believe in bariatric surgery in over 65 patients.
As we all do.
So that's a clear answer. Which procedure was the question actually? What would you choose?
Of course,
the hypoabsorptive.
Like Abdel, I don't perform mainly sleeve gastrectomy, but over 65, I will consider much more sleeve gastrectomy.
Wise answer. Thank you very much.
Ramon.
I will, as a discussion also,
Ah, okay, yeah, then.
I will go back to the question of Catalin because I think it's main important. In our center, and thanks to some surgeons like Dr. Pañella, we have been promoting the prehabilitation through 2 different studies. I think prehabilitation definitely is something that our physiotherapists need to be done, and I will try to make again the question, maybe to insinuate if it's necessary or no. First, to study very well the patient. How do we study this patient? Not only thinking, but doing the physical test, probably doing impedantiometry and dexometry even to evaluate the bone, but also which promoting exercise do you do to these patients? And in our center, we are promoting through 2 studies the way to do the standard care, which is, this is the list, do this at home and see you in 1 month in the OR, or rather having a proactive empowerment of the patient via direct contact with our specialist, or even eventually via internet applications. So again, I go back to the
Yes, no,
to the
I
question.
understand
Thank you.
perfectly what you say, but we are talking about a very selected group of patients.
Absolutely.
Not every over 65 patients needs to be evaluated. Of course, if this happens, I have to say that I said before that it's more expensive a magnetic resonance, but we surgeons go ahead quickly with it in order to evaluate the anatomy of the muscle. But don't forget that we have to evaluate also the function of the muscle. These cases are evaluated in some particular situation, and of course, I repeat you, it's a very small percentage of over 65 patients. Agree with you, of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I have a question, Maurizio.
Oh, one last question, but you can answer it here. Just sit down, Maurizio. Oh.
When you decide to convert the initial procedure, when the sarcopenia happened after bariatric surgery in this group of patients?
And you mean convert back or to
Yeah.
something different? So
I
to
think,
undo it.
reversal or conversion.
Right.
I have to say, I have 22% of revisional surgery, but I never had a conversion for sarcopenia. In any case, this is an hypothesis which could be considered in critical case. Of course, if it's difficult, it depends on the operation. It's impossible to convert a sleeve gastrectomy. But if you have a biliopancreatic diversion, because today in Italy we have many patients with malabsorption operated on 20 years ago, and it could happen, or a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass or AGB, we should consider the conversion. I agree, independently from the age.
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much, Maurizio.
Thank you, Maurizio. Let's move on to the next lecture. Pediatric stroke adolescent systematic review for ASMBS IFSO guidelines. It's done by Mr. Giacomo Plato from Italy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maurizio, and thank you, Professor Angrisani, for this wonderful occasion. So I have nothing to disclose, and this is my case mix disclosure. So, as already said this morning, we know that 30 years after the first consensus statement on bariatric surgery, IFSO and the ASMBS joined their forces to provide some major updates and new indications for metabolic and bariatric surgery. In particular, we see that concerning our arguments, appropriately selected children and adolescents should be considered for metabolic and bariatric surgery. Moreover, we have the thresholds. Children and adolescents with a BMI greater than 120% of the 95th percentile and the presence of a major comorbidity, or BMI greater than 140 of the 95th percentile should be considered for metabolic and bariatric surgery in specialized center. So our task was to methodologically support new IFSO and ASMBS indications, and we did it according to the preferred reporting item for systematic review and the meta-analysis. So we defined the exclusion criteria, and we shared the search strategy among all the researchers. We started with more than 5,000 papers, but at the end of the process of the selection and exclusion, we ended with 42 papers. Quality was assessed with a JADAD and minors scale. There was one randomized control trial, 7 compared metabolic and bariatric surgery versus lifestyle modifications, and 10 compared different surgical techniques. We have a population of more than 3,700 patients with a mean age of 16, mean follow-up of 30 months, and mean preoperative body mass index of 48, and the presence of comorbidities as reported. We see that the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease regarded more than 50% of the patients. So the effects of metabolic and bariatric surgery in pediatrics and adolescents reported mean delta BMI of 15.15 with a mean percentage of excessive weight loss of 63. We have a great comorbidity resolution with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease resolved in 100% of the patients, and diabetes in more than 90%. Early complication rate was 0.8 with a reoperation rate of 0.28 and a leak rate of 0.22%. Late complication rate regarded 4% of nutritional deficiencies and a reoperation rate of 1.8. But the 90% was connected to the laparoscopic adjustable gastric banding. About mortality was 0.11%, but no mortality related to metabolic and bariatric surgery. There was one death for pneumonia and one for cardiac failure. So we know that overweight and obesity in childhood and adolescence lead to premature mortality and physical morbidity in adulthood. We understand from the systematic review that surgical approach seems to be more and lasting effective than lifestyle modifications, especially in terms of weight loss and resolution of comorbidities. But we have to consider, of course, an increased risk of postoperative complication. From the Teen Labs database, comparing different laparoscopic bariatric procedures, we see that all the procedures have an acceptable lasting excess of weight loss with good resolution of comorbidities. We see that there were 16 papers on Roux-en-Y gastric bypass in pediatrics and adolescents with good weight loss outcome and good improvement of resolution with acceptable complication rates. And interestingly, there was one paper with 10 years follow-up on more than 2,500 patients in which metabolic and bariatric surgery does not negatively impact pubertal development or linear growth. And this is very, very important for this argument. In conclusion, we can say that data from a systematic review support IFSO and ASMBS indications with these recommendations that the metabolic and bariatric surgery is safe and effective in population younger than 18 years and does not negatively impact on pubertal development or linear growth. But we have to keep in mind these aspects, and this is very important. We have an overall population of 6,000 patients with only one randomized control trial, with only 25 adolescents, 2 years follow-up, and this was regarding laparoscopic adjustable gastric banding versus lifestyle. We have only one long-term follow-up focused on impact and pubertal development, but at 10 years there were only 600 patients. Of course, laparoscopic sleeve hysterectomy and Roux-en-Y leads to better long-term results than laparoscopic adjustable gastric banding, but of course they are associated with higher morbidity. and we know very, very few about the importance of psychological and psychiatric evaluation of the parents of the patients. So to me, the most important take-home message should be that we have a strong need of randomized controlled trial involving dedicated ethic committee with prolonged follow-up for proper indication, thresholds, and programs for metabolic and bariatric surgery in pediatrics and adolescents. Thank you for your attention.
Any questions from the floor? So, can I ask you one question? What surgery would you recommend?
What surgery?
Yeah, obviously the study the published is just for a band, and so
let me say that in Italy we have a very, very, very few experience on this type of surgery. So far we are updating our guidelines. So in Italy we perform only surgery on pediatrics or adolescents only under experimental studies with in the university settings. So I don't have any experience, but to me, for example, offering some restrictive procedure like a hysterectomy or some malabsorptive procedure should be risky for these patients, because we don't know in this category of patients the long-term effect.
So I know there's a couple of experts with a lot of expertise in the audience. Is there any comments from them? I saw Thorsten somewhere and Francois. What will you choose in this case? So what's your recommendation at this point?
Hi.
Sorry for inviting you, but
It wasn't. Thorsten Oberst from Sweden. We've been doing consistently Roux-en-Y bypass for adolescents since 2006, and we now, together with Kajsa, I'm sitting with here as a psychologist, we've done a randomized study also, which came out this springtime. And so far, we haven't found any reason for changing that. We know that there have been challenging issues with the Roux-en-Y if you just spread it all over. But looking at the literature, I must say that we can't ignore that the evidences are with the Roux-en-Y bypass with adolescents. But I think Wendy Brown is continuing on the next talk about that. But personally, we are now doing this. We have found we just got the data from the last 50 adolescents, and basically the nurse who was reviewing it said that they are all doing fine, and they are now several years after. But we can use Roux-en-Y in adolescents. That's the point. I think that most of the world has said that we go for sleeve because that's a smaller operation, but we have to think about that they're going to live for 70, 80 years. I think that's and to have a procedure that is sustained weight loss.
thank you so much for your insights.
Yeah, go on, Kathleen.
To defend the sleeve somehow, we know the evidence, but in the light of the pharmacology and the long-term complications that can be associated with Roux-en-Y gastric bypass or any other hypoabsorptive procedure, we tend to offer sleeve for children and adolescents more and more. We have a consistent experience in this respect. However, the follow-up, the surgery itself is together with pediatric surgeons and pediatricians. They are following together the patients, and it's a special note for girls rather than boys to go for a sleeve. That's our attitude. But we need data for sure. I agree with you 100%. This is, if we read what we have published already, you're right.
just a short comment, but if I'm concerned about the reflux in very young patients, and you're cutting away the stomach for the entire lifetime, you're taking all the spare parts away. And the reflux in young persons who are going to live 50, 60 years with the reflux, that's my concern. And there's quite a conversion rate from sleeve to bypass now.
Yeah, it is a discussion about reflux and Barrett's that it's going more and more distant, I can say. Looking to the results of the last studies, it's not the case to be that worried associated with sleeve. We learn more and more to perform sleeve and understand what it's exactly the reason of the cause of the reflux, which is not the sleeve concept, but the intrathoracic migration and all those consequences, which are exactly the same for the bypass. 10 years after, they can be on PPIs too. So I think we need data, that's for sure, but I felt as a discussant to warm up a little bit the discussion and to give some fuel for sleeve too.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Marcos Vilas Boas from Brazil, and we do have a pretty large experience, not so large, but more than 100 patients with Roux-en-Y and sleeve gastrectomy. Patients for 20 years with Roux-en-Y, pretty safe, of course, some iron deficiencies, but nothing more than that. But in the last 5 years, I am doing more sleeves, and they are pretty better than the adult ones in regards of reflux. So I think it's a very nice option, the sleeves as well as a gastric bypass.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments. Yeah.
So the last question.
You may know we recently published a paper about the efficacy and safety of one-anastomosis gastric bypass in children and adolescents that has been published recently in obesity surgery. And we have no major complications in 5-year follow-ups in children and adolescents with OAGB compared to Roux-en-Y gastric bypass and a sleeve gastrectomy. When you do a sleeve gastrectomy in a child or in an adolescent patient, as one colleague said, you make the patient prone to chronic GERD after a sleeve gastrectomy. And more than 30% of the patients will experience severe GERD after a sleeve gastrectomy. And a sleeve gastrectomy is an amputation, I can't recommend it in children or adolescent patients that should be alive more and more than elderly patient or adult patients. So I think we should see with another way that we can select other convertible procedures such as Roux-en-Y gastric bypass or one-anastomosis gastric bypass. In another hand, the adherence of children and patients to obey the nutritional support is less compared to adult patients. You can't prohibit the patients to use the sweets or snacking. The adherence of patients is very, very lower than compared to adult patients. So I think gastric bypass, even Roux-en-Y or one-anastomosis gastric bypass, can be a good option in this group of patients.
Thank you, Mohamed, for your comment. I have another small question for Dr. Piatto, who in the last month studied and evaluated the literature. What, Dr. Piatto, regarding this item C, the literature, what suggests us? Is better sleeve gastrectomy or Roux-en-Y gastric bypass?
So far, we cannot state which is the best procedure for this population. There is very few data on the best treatment. We know that of course sleeve gastrectomy and Roux-en-Y are associated with higher complication rate, even if there is no not death related to surgical procedure on this category. So I cannot suggest any kind of this what emerges from this interesting discussion. The evidence so far does not bring us to any suggestion to which is the best procedure for this category of population. What if I can make another comment? To me, this type of surgery scares a bit, and on this category of population, because of, as already said, we have a very short data on the very long-term follow-up. So, and as I've already underlined before, we have a very few data on the importance of psychiatric evaluation of the parents of the patient, because we know that bariatric surgery is based on the compliance of the patients, and this is never never stressed on these papers, the role of the psychiatric and psychological evaluation of the parents, because we offer let me use this term, even if it may sound inappropriate, a psychiatric surgery to patients, because but the decision is not on the based. It's not taken by the patient, but by the parents of the patients, and so we must keep in mind this.
Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure to go ahead with João Pujol with the presentation regarding, of course, pediatric and adolescents. What the guidelines don't say, real-life indication behind the guidelines. Podium is for you.
Thank you, Mauricio. Let me also congratulate Luigi for such a beautiful Congress, and it's an honor for me to be here. Let me answer the question that you present about which is the best technique. We do not know, but data analyzing big database, nationwide database, mimics quite similar the adults one. So first was wrong-wide gastric bypass, who was the winner. Gastric band had its moments, but so far now it's forbidden in states for young people. And now the great winner is sleeve gastrectomy. So these are the data. So it's and then it's up to you. We have no evidence. I have no conflict of interest apart that I am a bariatric surgeon. And I'm supposed to talk about the real-life indications beyond guidelines. So it's not my opinion. It's not evidence. It's just what's happening now in real life. And, well, the point is that we know that obesity is a chronic disease, that bariatric surgery is the only way of controlling it, and the sooner we do it, the better. And that's why over the last few years, many different medical societies have widened their recommendations for pediatric metabolic bariatric surgery. There have been many papers proposing to widen the indications, for example, for diabetic patients with lower BMI, etc. But my question, and I've been invited to talk about, is have these recommendations been translated into medical practice? And the answer is that it seems that they have not yet, unfortunately. If we attend, well, despite all the evidence that we have about the advantages of operating sooner, many large nationwide databases show a low, very low surgical rate, much lower than when we analyze the adults who are being operated. And this is because there are a lot of barriers for the children to take them to the OR. For example, providers' barrier. Survey data suggests that providers, physicians, GPs, pediatricians are usually reluctant to refer pediatric patients with obesity to bariatric surgery. In 2009, for example, Iqbal sent a survey to 60 American pediatricians, and nearly 90 of them would be very unlikely or would never refer a child for bariatric surgery. And 1 year later, Woolford sent a survey to a sample of more than 700 physicians, finding that almost half of them would never refer adolescent for a bariatric procedure. And we're talking about adolescents, neither children. And it was in States. But in UK, it's exactly the same. Penny discovered that only 9% of the UK physicians have ever referred an adolescent to be considered for bariatric surgery. Banbury surveyed more than 100 pediatric providers, and nearly 1/3 of respondents did not know that metabolic surgery was a treatment option for adolescents. And less than 10% have ever referred patients for surgery, citing things like concern about complications, not believing it is indicated in pediatric population, costs, etc. These are facts. Physician concerns and beliefs include lack of knowledge about biology of obesity, surgical procedures. They are not aware of what we are doing. They are not aware of the real risks of the operation, and they do not know how to follow up the patient after the operation. There's a lack of awareness of surgery as an option. There's concern for altered growth or development of the children after the operation. Some of them believe that weight is a personal responsibility rather than a medical problem. And there's always the complicated ethic of surgery in adolescents and children who have to be well informed and if they have to consent or not. We know that early intervention increases the chances of patients reaching a healthy body weight. However, in real life, the average age of young people undergoing surgery remains high. If we analyze the paper, who take big data, we see that most of them, the people who are operated, are between, the mean age is between 18 and 19 years old. They are not children anymore. They are young adults. We also know that individuals who present with highest BMI levels are less likely to achieve a non-obesity state after it. However, in real life, the average BMI of the young people operated on is still high. Messi analyzed a big database, and nearly 4,000 pediatric patients operated. The mean pre-op BMI was nearly 50. So almost 1/3 of them, the mean BMI was 50 or even over 50. So providers wait longer to refer the patients. The most common minimum BMI level suggested by physicians to make a referral for bariatric surgery in Wilford work was 40 or above 40, never below 40. And these are, comparing with adults population, very high. There's also parental barrier, as we have already mentioned here. Many parents underestimate the severity and risk of their child's obesity. And this underestimation of their children's weight can be influenced by their own implicit weight bias. Several parents see metabolic surgery as a wrong or too easy solution for their child's actual problem. They saw their child's obesity as primarily psychological or pedagogical problem rather than an illness. They say, I don't consider obesity as a disease at all. With us, it has everything to do with our lifestyle. I can manage it. And this is very, very influenced by their pediatric providers. By sending a questionnaire to 72 parents, Ubashi discovered that the main factor influencing parents' willingness to consider surgery for their child was whether they were received counseling by their pediatric providers. Only 35% who did not receive provider counseling would consider bariatric surgery for their child, whereas 85% of parents who were counseled do consider bariatric surgery. So this finding emphasizes the significant role provider counseling plays in parents' decisions. So we have to inform providers, general practitioners, pediatricians, physicians. And there's our own barrier, the surgeon barrier. Because only a limited number of surgeons specialize in bariatric surgery, and most only treat adults. In many papers, it's been demonstrated not knowing a local bariatric surgeon, for example, was the most common reason cited by physicians for not referring patients in Abidor paper. Or only 21% of UK bariatric surgeons have performed bariatric surgery on adolescents in the previous 12 months. And many surgeons are still reluctant to embrace bariatric surgery in adolescents patients, even the surgeon. They state that it is irreversible, invasive, and has potential lifelong alterations. And finally, there's a payer's barrier, which is very important as well. In many countries, payers also limit surgical intervention in children and adolescents. In Inge paper, for example, in States, less than half of all pediatric cases, approval was granted upon initial request for coverage, while in contrast, payers initially approved most of adults who met similar criteria. And it was just the age of the children that was the most common reason for denial childhood obesity. However, there's a positive point. We have good future perspectives because while adolescent bariatric surgery has remained largely underutilized, the number of procedures performed yearly seems to be rising. For example, the annual volume more than tripled from 2000 to 2003, more than double from 2003 to 2009, and from 2020 to 2021, the rate increases by 20%. And not only the number, but also GPs are more open to refer younger patients for bariatric surgery. The average minimum age of 14 years proposed by GPs to consider referral in 2018 rubric paper is significantly lower than the nearly 70 years found in the Woolford 2010 survey. So in summary, metabolic bariatric surgery in children or even young adolescents is still underutilized. There's a low referral rate by many physicians. Some parents see surgery as a wrong or too easy solution for their child's obesity. Insurance coverage also limits those who can undergo surgery. Some bariatric surgeons are still reluctant to perform childhood bariatric obesity. And however, fortunately in recent years, the trend has been clearly upwards. So what we have to do is to educate physicians, educate pediatricians, educate general practitioners for them to refer the patients. Thank you very much for attending, and I don't want to finish without inviting you all to the next IFSO European Chapter Congress that will take place next year in Vienna, the lovely city of Vienna. Thank you very much.
We have time for one question. Yes.
I'm Mary from United Kingdom, and this is not particularly a question about the last one, but this is for the people who are already doing bariatric surgery. I know there was a debate between which one is better, Roux-en-Y gastric bypass or sleeve. I think when you make those, this is for them, when you make that decision of offering Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, do you actually think about long-term weight loss outcome? Because it's not going to be all hunky and dory, because they have another 60, 70 years to live. I'm sure a good chunk of people will regain weight. And what strategies do you have in your mind? And I think we need to make those decisions with the current, the availability of newer medications plus sleeve, the combination of, would offer much better weight loss rather than Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, which sometimes look like a
Okay, thank you for your remark. Any remarks on that, Ramon?
Well, I just wanted to do some comments. Thank you, Dr. Pujol, for your kind presentation. I think what the panelists has shown us is that the trends through the bariatric surgery has been changing in the last years, especially with the eruption of the sleeve. We've seen it in the previous presentation. The sleeve has come to tell us that we can do more things to more complex patients, including elderly and young patients. And the other thing is that, and thanks to a lot of leaders like Al-Katani, but also Thomas Ingley from Cincinnati, in which he even published his comparative study of sleeve bypass in the New England Journal of Medicine, comparing the both, is that the sleeve has gained a position in which we are more able to really offer this option and technical options. I think, however, that the long term of the sleeve will be questioned, and I think that's the reason why we still don't have so much indications from our pediatricians right now, because now we are talking about the mid-long term complications as the literature flows. Weight regain, GERD, and this is an issue. In 2013, I led a multi-systemic and multi-society study in Spain with more than 9 societies that was published in obesity surgery, and in which we understood that we need to do contacts between the different society and pediatricians, and you need to be very involved with all your pediatricians in order to do a transition with your patients, and not only saying, oh, now he's 16, bye-bye, you can go to the other door. And this is not the way you need to put your practice daily. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to be sorry, but we have to go on to the next speaker. So Juan, thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank Wendy Brown for making the 20-hour flight all the way over here, right? And of course, we will come to Australia next year before we end up. So the floor is all yours, and I think that everybody here, the participants, are well prepared for your talk right now after what we've already heard. So do tell us, what is the best approach?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking me to give this talk. I'm feeling like there's been so much expert advice and opinion given that I hope I'm not duplicating too much. I won't tell you how long it really took me to come, because you might not want to come to Australia next year if I do. These are my disclosures. So I've been asked to talk about what's the best approach, and I think it's pretty clear from the preceding speakers that we don't really know what the best approach is. And I think really my bias to this is that we have to adopt a personalised medicine approach and sit with our patients and understand what's most important to them. And with these particular patients, we have to be thinking of young people that have a disease that is going to affect them for the rest of their life. So how are we going to treat them for their whole life, and what's that journey going to look like? These are the current indications for metabolic bariatric surgery. They've changed since 1991, much more simplified in 2002. And we talk about Asian individuals as special groups and people with a class 1 obesity. But specifically in these guidelines, they say that appropriately selected children or adolescents should be considered for these surgeries. Why would we consider adolescent bariatric surgery? It's been covered before, but it's very prevalent in our communities now. It's estimated over 50 million girls worldwide and 74 million boys worldwide are now in that obese category, with severe obesity affecting 6.1% of children in the USA and 5.5% in Europe. The problem with this is that as they move into adulthood, they're at higher risk of adult obesity, and they've also got a higher risk of comorbidities and early mortality. So this goes to show you that when you're in the obese range from birth through to adolescence, what your chance of being an obese adult would be. And you can see it's not insignificant. At least 77% of people will end up in those being obese when they're older if their BMI is in the higher than 95th centile. This has an impact on life expectancy, and it's a busy slide, but you can see as the BMI goes up, in those aged under 20, the lives of year lost gets proportionately higher. So someone who's under 20 with a BMI of 45, who's a black man, loses at least 20 years of life. These are all good reasons for us as healthcare professionals to be looking at helping children and adolescents with obesity to lose weight. But which is the best option? And I think this is the question we're narrowing down in on the information we've seen today. There's now been 2 Cochrane reviews trying to see which treatments we should be looking at, and in summary, they're unhelpful. When they did the review this time in 2022, they only found the one randomised controlled trial that my group, led by Paul O'Brien and John Dixon, did several years ago using gastric band. So they were unable to make new recommendations, and they highlighted the need for more RCTs. They noted there was 3 RCTs coming, and Torsten's was one of them, the AMOS-2 study, and they also said they needed guidelines based on observational studies. So drilling down on what information we have comparatively, we do have information on gastric band in that trial that we performed on 50 adolescents. We found that at 2 years, the adolescents who'd had an LAGB had gone from a BMI of 42 down to a BMI of 29.6, whereas the medically treated group had dropped from 40.4 to a BMI of 30.2. If we look at the teen lab study, which gives us, it's a longitudinal cohort study, giving us information on Roux-en-Y gastric bypass and sleeve gastrectomy. They also had a handful of bands, which they didn't include in their paper. You can see there's probably a little more weight loss, but not that much more weight loss, with the sleeve and the bypass actually comparable at 3 years, with around 25%, between 25 and 30% total body weight loss. Importantly, we're not just doing weight loss surgery, we're doing health-giving surgery. And all of these procedures also provided significant improvement for health for the teens that underwent these procedures. So in the randomised controlled trial looking at gastric banding, LAGB led to improvement in triglycerides, hypertension and insulin resistance. In terms of safety, there was no deaths, but there was a 28% need for revision of the band or port over the period of the trial. In the teen labs, the comparative cohort study, 95% of the type 2 diabetes resolved. In fact, it was 100% of patients who had sleeves had resolution, and 94% of those who had Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. 80% of hypertension resolved, and these results appeared stable at 5 years and were actually better than what was achieved in adults with Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. You have to remember, though, as a cohort study, there is probably a risk of selection bias, and surgeons may have preferenced one operation over another according to the child's comorbidities. But in fact, at baseline, there were quite similar demographics. I think in the AMOS-2 study, it would confirm also that there is very good resolution of all comorbidities, although in the AMOS-2 study, I think there was some, and Torsten can correct me, there was a reduction in bone mineralisation in the group that had Roux-en-Y gastric bypass when compared to a control group. In terms of safety, though, there was one death in the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass group. I think a death is always tragic in any of our procedures when we're giving an operation to increase life, but I think it's particularly tragic in a child or a teen. And there was a nearly 20% need for a repeat laparotomy and a 13% chance of a repeat endoscopic procedure such as stricture dilatations. So there is no such thing as a perfect operation. If we had it, we'd all been doing it and we wouldn't be debating it so passionately. So what do? We look at the evidence. The evidence we've got is sort of 2B level and probably a recommendation grade of B. So all we can do as clinicians is sit with our patients and explain that we have some great tools. They're really good tools. They can help people lose weight. They can help their comorbidities, but they come at a cost and they come at a risk. And will they last forever? Am I going to be able to tell a 15-year-old that this operation that they have at age 15 will take them through to age 90? I hope they get to live to 90 because of the weight loss that we have provided them. But I think that's unrealistic to think there's such a thing as one operation. We don't expect it in hiatal hernia surgery. We don't expect it in any other surgery we do for benign disease. Why should we don't expect it in joint replacements. Why should we expect it from a bariatric procedure? So I think we need to acknowledge that. We shouldn't resile from it, and we need to talk to our patients about the good and the bad and what it is going to be in the longer term. We also need to consider, especially in children, and this has already been discussed, around the Tanner stage and linear growth. There's a growing feeling that we don't need to think about this, but the evidence for this comes from case control studies and cohort studies. It doesn't come from randomised controlled trials, and it doesn't come from big registries. So I would be very cautious about that. There's an increasing movement that we don't need to be thinking about people's ability to comply with lifestyle change. I would argue that it's the job of a teenager. It's their job to rebel. It's their job to question. That's how they grow as humans, and that's how they establish their own ID. So I think it is important to think about that, and you do need to think with your MDT and your multidisciplinary team about how you approach this. And I would still be very careful in syndromic obesity, developmental delay, autism spectrum, and history of trauma. I don't know, just personally, I get a lot of psychologists and physicians telling me, yeah, it's fine, go ahead and do it. But I'm the one that has to operate. I'm the one that has to work with the patient. So just be careful. So we have some guidelines. How good are the guidelines? Guidelines are only as good as the consensus of the people who are there, and they're very good people that are in the room, but they usually come carrying their own biases and their own desires. So I do think that they're good guidelines in terms of class 1 and class 2 and class 3 obesity. Maybe we could think about class 1 obesity also, particularly if there's a metabolic need for improvement and also a psychological need for improvement. It wasn't in our paper, but the striking thing about our trial in LAGB was that children went back to school. They finished their schooling, they went on to university because they stopped being stigmatised at school. And that in itself is an amazing endpoint and very hard to capture. I don't think we can put into a guideline how complex it is to make a decision about what operation you're going to do for a teen. I think it comes down to knowing your patient, personalised medicine, and trying to come up with a pathway that makes sense for that person. So I think there's emerging evidence that this, in fact, there's very established evidence that it's a good thing to think about bariatric metabolic surgery for teens. I'm not so sure about children. I could find no good evidence for children that were younger than teens. And I really think this is a role for registries so that we can start to collect big numbers around the world and get a real sense of what happens. And I think the risk versus benefit needs to be considered in all cases, and that is to include in a teen their ability to comply with lifestyle change, the likelihood of achieving not only weight loss but improved health, the lifelong impact of that weight loss versus changing their anatomy, and also the cost efficacy. And ultimately, do what you do well. Do the operation you do all the time, the one you do safest, and do it in a facility where you can do it well and where that teen will have their special support. So again, everyone's talking about their meetings, but I really do want you to come visit me in my hometown of Melbourne. It's a beautiful city. We're going to have a great meeting with a lot of good things going on. This is the view from my balcony. It's kind of a gorgeous city. Lots of gardens and a lovely river to run along, and I think you'll find lots of nice restaurants and entertainment, as well as a very exciting program. So thank you again for inviting me.
So Wendy, thanks again for your considerations, I think. Perhaps the strongest message I heard is that we have to question ourselves what we call success. And you told us that kids going back to school, going to university might be actually the thing that we should be looking at instead of, let's say, even comorbidities or weight loss, etc. So thank you so much. We have time for one short question, I think, and then we actually have to round up. And if there's no questions, we're going to come over to Australia next year. At least I'm coming.
Oh, please do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes,
also
we'll have another session in Australia. That'll
Yes.
be great.
Thank you also from my side. So if you agree, I think it's 2.1 minutes. So we are a little bit late. Thank you very much to everyone, and have a good lunch.
Thank you so much.